in a sort of risk-free basis.
Yugoslav television has gone out of its way today to show life continuing as normal in the capital. And last night, demonstrations against the bombing and the number of citizens prepared to deploy themselves as human shields on potential targets seemed to be increasing. Jake Lynch, Sky News.
Aid agencies in Albania have already begun to give assistance to the latest refugees to arrive in the country. They say they were forced out of their homes in Kosovo. Sky's Peter Sharp is in Kukës and reports on the continuing exodus.
Once again, they came under the cover of darkness. A huge convoy, 3,000 to 5,000 refugees, following that all too familiar route across the mountains into northern Albania and safety. They'd come from Kosovo Polje, the Serbs' spiritual heartland near Pristina, now ethnically cleansed. It was the biggest influx of refugees since the border was closed 4 days ago. The police and soldiers entered our home, he said. They told us to go wherever we liked. They meant out of Kosovo. Those whose tractors had enough fuel made it to a temporary rest camp 24 kilometers from the border, where they joined others moved out the night before. They had spent a harrowing 15 hours on the road, harassed by Serb troops and police. Like so many others, they'd been given just minutes to grab what they could before joining the long convoy to the border.
There's been multiple cases of brutality everywhere, from the sheer terror of being collected, and of course then it carries on to being actually brutalized. There's been lots of cases where they've been robbed, lots of cases where most of their possessions have been removed to completely dehumanize these people. We've had multiple unconfirmed reports of some of the girls being raped. So anything that the Serbian security forces can do to terrorize these people, I believe it has been done.
The refugees said southern Kosovo is all but deserted. The road to the border littered with abandoned cars and slaughtered farm animals. Their arrival here in northern Albania putting further pressure on a relief operation struggling to cope. The refugee population is now approaching 100,000 in the Kukës region alone. A flood of humanity which shows no sign of ending. According to these refugees who arrived here last night, Serb troops are adopting a new terror tactic to extort money from the people, threatening to take away their teenage sons if they didn't hand over their cash. Peter Sharp, Sky News, on the Albanian-Kosovo border.
In Macedonia, poor sanitation and inadequate medical supplies are compounding the suffering of thousands of refugees. Despite the threat of disease, aid workers say unsympathetic Macedonian guards have turned the camps into prisons, refusing to allow even sick refugees outside for treatment. Sky's Emma Hurd saw some of the worst conditions when she visited a camp near Radusa.
Of all the refugee camps in Macedonia, this is the worst. The aid agencies were refused access to help these people for more than a week. The Macedonian authorities would allow in little more than bread and water.
Their conditions are really bad, especially for the baby, because they don't have anything to feed her with. And the baby has stomach aches, doesn't feel good.
It's little wonder disease is spreading. 1,500 people share just 3 filthy toilet blocks, using water from here to wash in.
The hygiene is a big problem, water and sanitation, and therefore you see a start of diarrhea cases.
But despite the suffering here, these people aren't allowed to leave. The Macedonians want the refugees locked in the camps, not free in their country.
Even the sick aren't being allowed to leave this camp. The doctors here asked for ambulances to take people to hospital, but the Macedonian authorities said they couldn't leave. They had to be treated here.
And yet the doctors can do little for them.
You can see we have not enough drugs here to treat the patients. We just have some drugs, some syrups for temperature, fever. We must get antibiotics for each person.
Supplies of food are finally reaching this remote mountain valley, but no one here knows when the medicine will come. Emma Hurd, Sky News, Radusa, Macedonia.
In other news...
Mr. Sadeo, I don't know whether you can throw any light on what Duncan Kennedy was speculating about there. Do you think the latest influxes of refugees into Albania are victims of a systematic cleansing operation by the Serbs, or are these just one-off events?
No, this is a process which is going on for years now with the escalation of war now, and this process has escalated. Now, only the areas where they are still under the control of KLA, as it is the northern part, Shala and Lap region, the Drenica region, a mountainous area, basically.
This is the corner of Kosovo that's nearest the Montenegrin border.
Rugova is the nearest that corner, which we have reports today that fighting is going on. Probably the KLA has received new forces, as it was on the plan, that during this week we have slowly to enforce our troops inside Kosovo with new supplies, with new men. And it is a corner between Macedonia, Albania and Kosovo, which is still preserved from these atrocities.
But how are you achieving this reinforcement? Are they coming through Albania?
Through Albania, we have our camps now. It is not any secret. Our people has responded to the order of High Command of Kosovo Liberation Army for general mobilization.
How many men and women do you have in arms in the KLA, both inside and outside Kosovo?
So inside Kosovo has been estimated last figures before the NATO attacks, about 25,000. Now we have reports that already since this order of general mobilization has been given by the High Command, we have already 12,000 on the training camps, and some already has gone in.
So your need really is not for troops, because in many cases some of these will be very raw recruits, so perhaps not really prepared for hard fighting or indeed for hard marching, but presumably for arms.
That is our main problem now, which NATO countries and the Western powers, including the public opinion in Britain and all over this Western Hemisphere, must understand that the main objective, which is now, is arming Albanian fighters.
So how is that to be achieved? Is it to be done by the KLA's own funding from wealthy Albanians abroad, or are you expecting NATO to help?
I think as a first phase, we are ready to support our army with our funds, and and we are talking about a modern weaponry. We are not talking anymore with the Kalashnikov, the anti-tank missile, the surface missile. I think as a first phase, we can resist. We can support our fighters. But as a last resort, if NATO is not ready to send ground troops, I think will be enough just to train and arm our fighters, and we will do the job.
Today, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Cook. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to use this momentum for thanking the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Cook, for organizing this interview. What I would like to say is that this joint press conference proves that the position of United Kingdom and Albania towards Kosovo crisis are closer than ever. The Albanians have followed and greeted the statements of Prime Minister Mr. Blair, of my colleague Mr. Cook, and of the Defense Secretary Mr. Robertson. I have the pleasure to say here that Albania looks with great sympathy at the United Kingdom's attitude towards a tragedy in the very heart of our continent. The British policy consists at present of one of the main pillars of the campaign for life that the democratic world has undertaken in Kosovo for destroying the war and crime machinery of Serbia. This is a full guarantee that this time the tyranny will not succeed. Albania is one of the countries that are directly influenced by the Kosovo crisis. But, on the other hand, it is one of the countries mostly engaged in the struggle for the quick, long-term and peaceful solution, a conflict whose source is that Belgrade's chauvinistic policy at the systematic ethnic cleansing and at the regular massacres Belgrade applied over the Kosovar Albanians during the whole 20th century.
On the Times, is the Albanian government prepared to allow a lot more NATO troops into your country to mount a ground offensive against the Serbs in Kosovo, if that is necessary?
Albanian government is ready to accept other ground troops from NATO. We now have decided to give NATO the rights to control all our airspaces, ports, and any kind of military infrastructure in Albania.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Pascal. It's good of you to join us. We know you have much to do. We may repeat this again.
Have a nice day.
See you again, my
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Campaign is working, and that 150 military targets have been hit since airstrikes began 3 weeks ago. But the alliance does not claim that its military operation has stopped alleged Serb atrocities within Kosovo. Thousands of refugees are once again pouring out of the province, many with disturbing tales of what's going on inside. 3 weeks of airstrikes may have brought little obvious relief to these people, but NATO says it will carry on the bombing until the cause of their suffering has been removed. Stephen Gibbs, BBC News.
Well, Britain's Foreign Secretary.
In Pristina, the casualties of war are being buried. After 18 days of airstrikes, the innocent on both sides have become victims of a campaign most people hoped would be over by now. The Serbs who approved these pictures say this is a family of Turkish origin pulled from rubble after a bomb attack. The province NATO set out to save is being torn apart by bombs and missiles and by ruthless ethnic cleansing by Serb forces. Not long ago, Pristina was filled with cafes and life. Now it's a society of war and food queues.
Cameras near the Morina frontier crossing between Kosovo and Albania. According to accounts from refugees, their comrades have been splitting off ethnic Albanian men from their families, who are then sent packing across the border without them. So what's happened to them? They might be among the concentrations of internally displaced people shown up on satellite pictures displayed yesterday by NATO. The Foreign Secretary arrived at today's news briefing with fresh information on their plight from a KLA leader in Kosovo.
Is that the refugees within Kosovo are in a very serious situation. In his words, they lack the basic elements for life and are particularly short of food. He believes that there are some 400,000 living in the mountains and the woods, hiding from the Serbs who would otherwise kill or deport them.
Meanwhile, 7 Navy...
This temporary camp, just 25 kilometers from the border, can't take many more refugees. Yesterday's influx was joined during the night by a further 3,000 to 5,000 people as the brutal depopulation of southern Kosovo continues unchecked. The latest victims of Belgrade's ethnic cleansing operation had arrived during the night, at daybreak trying to come to terms with a new life as a refugee. They spent nearly 24 hours getting here, continually harassed by Serb troops on the way. Some emotionally and physically exhausted by what they'd experienced.
There have been lots of cases where they've been robbed, lots of cases where most of their possessions have been removed to completely dehumanize these people. We've had multiple unconfirmed reports of some of the girls being raped. So anything that the Serbian security forces can do to terrorize these people, I believe it has been done.
This couple said southern Kosovo was now a wasteland, littered with abandoned cars and burnt-out villages.
It looked like from his own house in nearly Pristina countryside, I mean, to the border. It looked more like than a situation that had been somehow about 14th century.
Others told how Serb tanks had moved into the center of their villages for cover against NATO airstrikes. Emergency aid reached these people within hours of their arrival, but they will have to move south to Kukes, another 3 miles, to receive regular supplies of food. and there are still no tented camps to house them.
Despite these appalling conditions, these people have at least reached a place of safety. What is worrying aid officials is the fate of tens of thousands of others still missing somewhere in the mountains and forests of southern Kosovo. Peter Sharp, Sky News, on the Albanian-Kosovo border.
Well, let's go live now to Macedonia, where Sky's key. Clearly, great worries growing now about the number of men reported missing amongst the refugees. What can you tell us from your point of view?
Well, we've been talking, Chris, this morning to some of the European monitors who, of course, were inside Kosovo, and now they've had to leave about 3 weeks ago. And they are still in touch with some people inside by satellite phone and other methods. They are receiving reports of people being rounded up, of men of what they call fighting age being rounded up and taken to various locations. They haven't received any reports of any massacres of those men at the moment. And the reports of them being rounded up, again, they can't verify. But what they're saying is that if men are being rounded up in large numbers, or have been over the last couple of weeks, that would figure. That fits in with a pattern that's built up over the last few months. So that does give some veracity to the report. Here in the camps, there is certainly fewer men of fighting age than you would expect to see. Lots of old people, lots of women, lots of children. What people in the camp are telling us is that a lot of the men were afraid to approach the border when they were being rounded up and told to leave, or when they were leaving voluntarily. The men of fighting age were frightened to come through the Serb lines, and so a lot of them stayed behind. They've gone into hiding. Some have gone up to the mountains, and maybe some of them have joined the KLA, but no confirmation here that there have been mass roundups and massacres.
Now, the camp where you are at Stankovic, as we can see behind you, is looking pretty good from that very narrow angle that we have on it. But there are complaints growing that some of the camps in Macedonia are being turned into virtual prisons for the refugees.
Absolutely. You know, let me just show you the conditions there, Chris. It's raining at the moment, and that, of course, is going to make conditions much worse because it's going to get very muddy. But you can probably see from this position here just how packed in people are. There are about 18 people in this one tent. The tents are very, very close together. When it's raining like this, there's absolutely nothing for these people to do. They don't have any power. They go out and collect their food at set times. Boredom is going to set in. But one of the main problems they have at the moment is that they are worried what happens when NATO forces pull out. Now, that is going to happen possibly in the next week or two. The Macedonian army and police will take over the running of security at these camps. That frightens these people. NATO commanders at the moment are negotiating with the Macedonian police to see if they can ensure that there is still some sort of NATO presence here. Maybe foot patrols of NATO soldiers. The very sight of NATO soldiers will reassure these people. There is one other problem, though. The Macedonians have discovered that some of the aid agencies, it's got nothing to do with NATO, this, some of the civilian aid agencies have been smuggling refugees out. Just refugees who they know have got family members outside or in other camps. They've been smuggling them out, and that has certainly angered the Macedonians, and of course it's given them some grounds to complain about the way these camps are being run. So there's some tension at the moment between the aid agencies and NATO and the Macedonian authorities.
Keith, thank you very much. Keith Graves there in the refugee camp at Stankovic in Macedonia.
Të Kosovës, zëri Adem Jasharit, zëri Femi e Gjev Ladrovcit, na të rreth si asnjëherë më parë që të shtrëngojmë radhët e të qëndrojmë besnik amanetit të tyre, amaneti i të cilëve ishte o sot o kurrë për Kosovën e lirë. Jemi mbledhur sot këtu të ju përcjellim dhe të ju dëshirojmë fat në fushë betejat e ardhshme në Kosovë, me dëshirën që hera tjera edhe ne të ju bashkangjitemi juve. A dhe u pret nga ju e ju kokën lart krenar të marshoni me këngën
Shpejt do t'i bashkangjitëm shokëve, vllazëve, luftës, kundër shkjavt, ta qojmë amanetin e fundit dëshmorëve, Adem Jashojt, Homos Jashojt, Femir Gjev Ladrovcit, Ismet Jashojt Kumanjovës, deri në fitore. Rënoft UÇK-ja.
No!
Bakalımlar. Bakalımlar.
Mërgjimtarët tanë Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës janë mobilizuar për të ndihmuar fondin vendinja thret në orën 13 sipas kohës amerikane, përkatësisht në orën 19 sipas kohës son në John Kerst të New Yorkut ka filluar ceremonia e nisjes së regrutëve të parë për në dhe të cilët ju përgjigjen shtabit të përgjithshëm të ushtrisë çlirimtare të Kosovës. Ata së shpejti do të bashkohen radhëve të ushtrisë çlirimtare të Kosovës të vetmes forcë politike dhe ushtarake në Kosovën e martirizuar por krenare. Brigada Atlantiku është një vazhdimësi e traditës noliane të shqiptarëve të Amerikës dhe vargu të tij antologjik, mbahu nëno moski e frikë se i ke djemt në Amerikë. U shpreh kështu i ngarkuar nga shtabi i përgjithshëm i ushtrisë çlirimtare të Kosovës Hysni Sylla. Ndërkohë mediat amerikane vazhdojnë të kushtojnë rëndësi të veçantë ushtrisë çlirimtare të Kosovës dhe luftës së drejtë, duke i cilësuar luftëtarët e lirisë në mbrojtje të dhëut si ushtarë të disiplinuar. Ata shkruajnë, mediat amerikane objektiv kanë mbrojtjen e troje të veta nga agresioni fashizoid paraushtrake kriminal sërb. Në organizim të qendrës më të madhe televizive të Suedis TV4 dhe kryqit e kuq të Suedis u organizuan një mbrëmje për të ndihmuar refugjatët e Kosovës që u larguan nga dhuna e policisë dhe e ushtrisë sërbe, njofton Kosova Press. Gjatë transmetimit të drejt për drejt e kësaj mbrëmje për rreth 150 minuta u grumbulluan 26 milion krona suedeze. Ky aksion do të vazhdojë edhe më tej në këtë mënyrë, lufta e drejtë e popullit shqiptar të Kosovës po përfiton përkrahje ndërkombëtare.
NATO missiles set ablaze an oil refinery and blasted an army airfield on the outskirts of the Yugoslav capital early today. Firemen struggled to control the blaze at the refinery in Pančevo, a small town about 15 kilometers from Belgrade. A military airfield at Batnica, south of the Serbian capital, was also reported hit, and a car and arms factory in central Serbia also came under attack. Several explosions were also heard in the Kosovo capital, Pristina. It's the 19th night of the NATO bombardment. There are fears that fighting between Serb forces and the Kosovo Liberation Army could spread across the border into Albania. NATO foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels today to discuss progress in the air campaign against Yugoslavia. The alliance says it has evidence that the strikes are beginning to yield results.
After a weekend of relative restraint over the Orthodox Easter, NATO is again bombing hard. Serb television showed these pictures of an oil refinery north of Belgrade in flames. The alliance says that by hitting targets like this, it will eventually starve Serb troops of the fuel they need to operate. State-run television also showed pictures of damage in the northern city of Novi Sad, one of several cities apparently struck. NATO says this relentless bombing is slowing ethnic cleansing operations in Kosovo, but from the Macedonian border, Serb forces can be clearly seen moving from house to house. And there are disturbing reports that 400,000 refugees are out in the open hiding from these troops. A leader of the rebel Kosovo Liberation Army told the British Foreign Secretary that conditions are getting desperate.
They lack the basic elements for life and are particularly short of food. He believes that there are some 400,000 living in the mountains and the woods, hiding from the Serbs who would otherwise kill or deport them.
All 19 foreign ministers from the NATO alliance will meet later today to review the operation. As she arrived in Brussels to be greeted by NATO's Secretary General, the American Secretary of State said the meeting would not produce any changes of strategy, but it would be a clear demonstration of unity. Displays of unity are continuing in Serbia too, where once again thousands gathered at potential allied targets. NATO and the Serbian people appear to have a common belief that as long as they don't waver, they can win. Stephen Gibbs, BBC News.
Our correspondent Mike Williams is in Belgrade, where, like all reporters there, his movements are restricted and what he says is being monitored. He says last night's NATO bombings hit an oil refinery and a factory widely believed to be making weapons.
Well, there have been heavy attacks around the country, raids on two areas around Belgrade, both of which have been hit numerous times before, at the Batnica air base on the outskirts of the capital and at some kind of weapon. Also reports from Pristina, and while